Friday. So today we're actually going to pick up on a theme that I've discussed in the past and have gotten some positive feedback and asked if we would spend some more time discussing it. And so today we're going to look at what I've coined a term called the theology of integration. And it's embracing the power of the word and, A-N-D. Okay, so the theology of integration, looking at through this lens, we're both theologically and therapeutically. So it's really this idea of holding together two seamlessly opposite truths, experiences, or emotions by using the power of and. So it takes both the biblical principle and the mental health skill, right? Allow us to live in the complexity, like the paradox, rather than the forced simplicity. So as we lean into this today, it's gonna require us to think a little bit abstractly. It's gonna be able to require us to approach this with fluidity, again, rather than rigidity. So let me give you a couple examples of how we often think rigidly. We often think about it's either this or that, right? It can't be both, right? It has to be this or that. I'm right or wrong. It's good or bad. So we use this word or frequently. Let me give you another example. In fact, this frequently happens. I interact with people at churches and standing in the lobbies, walking in and out of church on a Sunday morning. You hear the question of like, "Hey, how you doing?" And you get statements like, "Well, not doing great." And then there's this other three-letter word, B-U-T, and then they connect it to another phrase. So it's something like this, right? Say, how you doing? Well, I've had a hard week, but God is good. Hey, man, how's it going? Well, I'm kind of struggling. And then there's that word again, but, but I'm doing better than I deserve. You ever heard that before? Somebody, you ask them, hey, how you doing? And they say better than I deserve, right? So here's how this applies, right? I think we're so often conditioned in our culture, in our society, to think rigidly, meaning that it's either or, that one thing is true, therefore the other thing cannot be true. Or we use this word but. But indicates that, well, something, the first statement is true, but then when we insert the word but, it somehow negates the power or the weight of the first statement when we add on the second statement. You get this? Like, this makes sense? So this theology of integration, now it's more than just sentence structure. It's more than just adding the word and to it. As I mentioned, it's this idea of being able to embrace the complexity, to embrace the paradox, to seamlessly hold two things that can be true at the same time. So let me give you an example of this from mental health. Um, as a therapist, I often talk with clients about a principle called an emotional co-occurrence. Okay, an emotional co-occurrence is this idea of I can be feeling two things at the same time. Okay, I want to keep talking about that, but I want to come back to it in just a moment. What I first want to start with is this idea of the word and then we're going to integrate that into this idea of co-occurrence. Okay, so um, let's switch for a moment to talk about the biblical kind of principles and the biblical foundations in this. And I specifically want to kind of hone in on how and where and when we find that word and in scripture and how God specifically, intentionally places that word to help us in this direction, to help us build a holistic and a more integrative theology. The very first verse in the Bible, Genesis 1:1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Right? They coexist. They're both there. There's not heaven or earth. There's not heaven but earth. Right? There's heaven and earth. They're both there. They coexist. They're both true. They're both real. Okay, just a few verses later, Genesis 1, I think it's chapters 4 and 5. God is talking about all the things that He's creating, in the beginning, and so that verse says, "God called the light day, and the darkness He called night, and there was evening, and there was morning." Notice the word "and" in there so many times, right? There was light. He called the light day, and He called the darkness night. Right? Two things that are the opposite, but they're both true. Two things that are in opposition of each other, but they both exist, right? Light and darkness, day and night, right? And then he gave this language to it, right? Then and there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Okay, so if we look at the other places throughout Scripture, I think there's a passage in Ecclesiastes. I think it's chapter 3. uh, and I love it. Actually, it goes through a whole um, section, which is very poetic. But I just want to pull out one verse from it, and it says, "There is a time to weep and a time to laugh. Like there's a time to mourn and a time to dance." Okay, so again, this word shows up, and it shows up in such a way where both can be happening, both can be true, right? There's a time to weep, that's true, and there's a time to laugh. In fact, that makes me think about, have you ever been to a funeral, a celebration of life, right? And both are happening, and both are valid, and both have their place, right? You have these moments when you remember the other person, right? And there's sadness and there's grief, right? That shows up, right? There's tears, and within the same experience, right? Gathered with the same people, there can be moments of celebration. There can be moments of laughter, right? There can be moments of remembrance. Again, that's a great example of this co-occurrence, or this idea we're talking about, the idea of integration, right? I got time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Here's what I think when we think about this idea of integration or co-occurrence, that we I think we really have to remember, and it often gets missed, is Jesus Himself. When Jesus comes, He is described and He is known from it's the book of John. I think it shows up again in Colossians, where it says He is both, both, right? Fully man and fully God. That's a paradox, right? How can that be true? How is that possible? Right? The complexity of this idea. Jesus Himself, right, comes to this earth in the full form of man, and yet He is still fully God, right? Like, to us, it's kind of a mind blowing principle. But if we think about this from a faith filled theological disposition, and what an incredible example of this paradox. Both things are true at the same time. Okay, so the Bible uses paradox over and over and over. It consistently presents truth in tensions with contradictions, not contradictions to confuse us, contradictions to strengthen us, not contradiction to put us at odds, but actually contradictions to increase this idea of integration. Okay, so I want to go back to what I was talking about just a few moments ago, the idea of the mental health insight, the idea of an emotional co-occurrence. Right. So just recapping, referencing this idea that two emotional experiences can be true at the same time. Okay. So whenever I public speak, this happens to me frequently. I have an emotional co-occurrence. I feel both excitement and anxiety at the same time. Right? I'm excited that I get to be where I am, that I get to present to a room full of people, that I get to share my thoughts, my insights, any wisdom I can bring to help support them. Right? That's the excitement part of me. But the other part of me is the anxious part. The anxious part of like, I hope I don't screw up, and I hope I don't make a fool of myself, and I hope if I have slides that they got loaded properly and they show up correctly, and that my microphone works, and that I don't overextend my time. And like I could just go through a whole long list, right? Things that make me nervous, worried, anxious, stressed about any public speaking experience. Okay, so here's what's important of that: they coexist, right? I feel excited and I feel anxious. I talked about just a moment ago the funeral experience, right? Where we can mourn and grieve, and we can laugh and celebrate, right? That passage that I referenced from Ecclesiastes. Okay, right. So like there can be joy paired with sadness. Another one, I work with clients, specifically when I'm working with couples. In the intake session or in one of the first initial sessions, I'll actually walk them through a few really strategic questions. And one of the first questions is the question is, what are you afraid of? Like if nothing changes in your current context or situation, right? Whatever brought you to therapy and counseling, if nothing changes, what are you afraid of? And I just sit with them and allow them to share with me, and more importantly, share with each other what fear shows up again if nothing changes in their current context or situation. We'll go through a few other questions, and one of the other questions towards the end is I ask them, so when something changes, what do you hope for? And the same kind of thing, I just sit with them and I listen and I'm attentive and create safe space for them. And most importantly, they get to share with each other when something changes, what do they hope for? And in that time together, sitting in a session with a couple, we've explored two things that are both true, right? Members of the couple who can align and agree and have a shared experience of, I'm scared, I'm afraid, right? If nothing changes, this is what I'm afraid of. And then just again within the same conversation to be able to say, hey, and when something changes, I'm hopeful, right? I'm optimistic, and allowing them to talk that out. It's actually pretty powerful to see it played out in a session with a couple. That, as I'm talking about it, is a great example. Again, it's this idea of an emotional co-occurrence. Okay, so let me give you maybe a couple practical examples for you, right? Like maybe for you, maybe you're starting a new job, or maybe you shifted to a new department, or you got a promotion, right? Maybe there's excitement and there's anxiety that coexist in those moments. Maybe there's a friend you haven't seen in a long time, and the same thing. There's excitement to see them, and there's worry or anxiety about will it go well, and will we reconnect, and will they like me? Maybe maybe there's grief as a result of loss of a season of life. Actually just walked with a family just last week who's telling me about the shift from raising their kids in the home to sending them off to college, and now this couple is early into their empty nesting season. What's so interesting about that is my wife Mindy and I are actually in that right now. Like we just sent our oldest son is in South Florida going to school. Our youngest son we just dropped off in Virginia where he's going to school, right? And we're navigating and we're trying to figure this out. So I remember sitting with this couple and being very empathetic and understanding because of what I'm experiencing. And so they talk about this idea of there's a sense of loss, right? Loss that family dinners won't look the same. Loss that the come home after school routines will no longer be the same. Loss of going to watch their soccer games or their band competitions or whatever it is on the weekends. They're just different now. They're not happening. right? We're in a different season of life. So there's this loss and there's grief, but it's paired with excitement, anticipation, gratitude, and again, the idea that they can coexist. All right, so I want to make this practical, and I want to talk about this idea of living in the A-N-D. Okay, so first of all, I think it's helpful for us from a theological perspective, just to be reminded or to acknowledge and recognize that this work of integration, it actually reflects God's image in us, right? Because we're complex, we're multifaceted beings designed and created as He is, right? Complex and multifaceted. I think it's also important in our kind of theological living out in the and, like Jesus in the book of Matthew, where he's approaching the end of his life here on earth. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. I think it's in chapter 26 of Matthew. And he experiences multiple things at the same time. He experiences anguish, right, about what he knows needs to be coming next, right? He already knows. He knows what he has to do. He knows what's coming, right? So there's this great anguish. In fact, he says he went to the garden and he prayed to the point where he was sweating blood. That's the way it's described, right? So intense. There was such anguish, but it was paired with submission. The submission of, Father, not my will be done, but yours. Anguish and submission. I think that also paired with him, kind of practical way, this idea of sorrow, right, and trust. An incredible amount of sadness, right? Sadness of as he took on and bore the burden of sin and humanity, right? And this incredible amount of trust that it must have taken for him, right, to walk to his death on the cross and willingly do so. Here's what I think is important. Paradox doesn't weaken our faith. It actually matures it. Right? So when we insert logic to this conversation, again, it doesn't weaken it. Right? Sometimes faith is, we think of it as like a blind faith or a childlike faith, which is that we apply no logic and no reason and no rationale. We just jump in and lean in and we just go for it, and that's faith. But that actually, in this case, paradox is we talked about the complexity of it, the multifacetedness of it, the requirement for us to think about it and lean into it, right? And it doesn't weaken our faith, it matures it. So when we can hold the word and, walking in the and, it shows up internally, but also it shows up relationally. Like when we can hold and in relationships. Think about this passage. I think it's in Ephesians where it says, speaking the truth in love, being both honest and gracious. That's the principle of speaking the love in truth, or speaking the truth in love. Requires us, truth is the honesty, right? Speaking truth in love requires us to be both honest, right? Truth, and gracious, right? Speaking that truth in a gracious, loving manner. Okay, so here's a few things as takeaways I want us to consider. I want you to consider these following reflection prompts. Okay, if you got a journal, take it out. If you want to just make mental note of this and come back to it, whatever that is helpful for you, or if you just want to pause this video and do it right here, right now. The first one is this: identify one area of your life where two truths or emotions coexist. Okay, this is part of like assessment and identification, to be able to say, hey, if I'm going to really be able to live in the and, I have to be able to recognize and understand where and how and when it's showing up in my own life, right? So identify one area in your life where two things, two truths or emotions coexist. Okay, the second prompt of this is this: how can you acknowledge both without diminishing the other? back to what I said at the beginning, that this idea, right? Rather than using the word or the word but, which might be dismissive, it might be minimizing, right? To one truth or the other, right? This question, how can you acknowledge both without diminishing either? I would encourage you, use the word and, okay? But find a practical way in which you can do that. And that leads me then to these practical steps. So, first is this: name both realities, whether it's an emotion, whether it's a truth, whether it's a perspective, right? Just name them. The second one is this: accept them without forcing resolution. So, what I mean by that is without forcing that one's better and one's worse and one's right and one's wrong and one's good and one's bad. No, no, no. Just accept them without forcing, right? That resolution. Allow them to coexist. And then the third one is this: for us as people of faith, bring them into prayer, asking God for wisdom and for peace, right? To be able to say, hey, God, we're going to trust you with this paradox, with this complexity, right? Where I'm experiencing two things at the same time, two truths, two perspectives, where I've named them, I've accepted them, acknowledged them, and God, I just want to bring them to you. Okay, remember, uh, this is not about an either or. Life actually doesn't work that way. It's far more about a both and that's actually this kind of maybe we call it this sacred tension where God meets us. All right, it's great to be with you guys today. This was fun to be able to get some feedback from a previous episode, to be able to speak into that and to take it a step further. Again, this idea of the theology of integration. If you want to give us feedback, if you have questions, if you want to reach out, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at coaching@livewellbehavioralhealth.com, or you can send a comment right here in the video or on our site. All right, have a wonderful weekend, everyone.